Am I allowed to give feedback as well? Or is it my turn later on?
No, you go ahead.
What I found very interesting about the session is it felt a bit like we're going backwards, if that makes sense. So through all the talks, we were going from projects that have been done, through projects that are planned, then down to the technical aspects of how you actually start with the data. I think this was a very interesting kind of viewpoint, because usually you start with the data and then start working towards the project, and the whole kind of setup of the session was the other way around, which I found very interesting.
Good interesting or bad interesting?
I think good interesting, because to me it was a bit like, this is what you can do. Now go step by step backwards how you actually do it. So I found it interesting and positive interesting.
Thanks. Is there anyone else has a view on that point?
I think that's Brian. Yeah, I repeat that same point about working towards outcomes and understanding what we have to do as opposed to what we can do, and then try to find solutions to problems that might not exist. When the COVID example is a perfect one of being able to react relatively quickly because of some things which have happened before. So yes, I found it very useful and insightful in some places as well.
And then Terry, you were.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that in other times where we started with the technology, it's like people just tune out because they can't see the practical application. So I think it's cool that we're getting this feedback.
Yeah, I agree.
I was really impressed with the way that you approached your points, and Tero. I was actually very drawn in and found myself kind of thinking, do I need to go back to university and go and study again? Because really, you made it very palatable, which I think was very good. What I was also very interested in is the methodology that you how you approach things as a company, and the capability, I guess, that there is within that. And obviously, I posed a few questions within the panelists session, which were have led to new links. So I'm very grateful for that, actually.
That was exactly the purpose for this event, Andres. I'm glad we hit in the nail. It was to promote this collaborations. We tried to spread both the panelists and the invites across different sectors, across different areas of expertise. Because as I think mentioned, and Ian both, David and Ian both mentioned earlier, we know a lot about data, but data on its own, it doesn't provide all the answers. We need the sector expertise. We need the actual subject matter experts to help guide us with our technology. We can help those people, but we can't do anything by ourselves. So hopefully the events like this start more multi-sector collaborations going forward.
Excellent, thank you.
I'd like to add in there, I think a lot of this is about context, and we're very technologically focused, so we need ideas and understanding of what the context might be and what are the problems. But one thing I'd say is by doing this with the business school and having that academic umbrella, I think that really allowed the panelists to be very open and have a really good discussion, which I think I've had feedback that people found that very useful.
We've had some feedback of the openness of the conversation, especially from the panelists, which is really positive, especially when we take into account public forums with sometimes competition, sometimes collaborators, but it's really good that we managed to keep really honest, open conversations throughout the event.
Rui, it's John. I don't want to chip in at one of the on the other panel one, but an exceptionally interesting topic that just goes round and round and round is trust. And again, it cropped up on one or two things, and it's one of those where there is just fundamentally no fix to it. You're into, I would suggest, the weakest part of the chain being involved, which is the carbon element, the person. So we do quite a lot of work with a number of customers on user behavior analytics and trying to understand the correct profile of an individual access in. Again, some of the AI tools that sit at the back of those technologies we have can bring an additional level of control to the complexity on it, but it's a hugely complex, interesting subject. The trust nature of it, just by the nature of what people are accessing, whether it's personal data, business related data, finance data, etc., etc. Just one I don't think there's a fix for out there, and it's an engagement of process, procedure, people and technology. I would throw on the table, and I'll go back on mute, but it's an exceptionally interesting topic, and it's one that just, it goes round and round, from people at the coalface right the way up to the board. You can sit with a board and just a different perspective on it, and no right answer will come out.
Yeah, it's Paul here. So I sort of asked that question, and it came from this point of view that we're all obsessed with like the fake news in the social media space. But when we're talking about open data, or when we're talking about basically sharing data for analytical purposes and things like that, if we start to do that on a larger scale, and we depend on it more, it was, what does it mean to have fake data? You know, what does it mean to have like accreditation maybe for sources of data, and how do you actually technically implement some sort of trust in the data? And we've been thinking about this for a couple of years, and in fact we started to think that identity is actually also part of data, right? So identity being a subcategory of the trust of data and the trust of facts. So that's the background to that question.
Paul, it's John again. The conversation around, you're spot on about the manipulation and the quality and validity of that data. I mean, rubbish in, rubbish out, and again, reputation based on output. Now, you see some of the horror stories where they've hacked in and put doctored X-ray images, Paul. And that sort of thing. And again, the breadth of carnage and chaos that these people can create out there is just horrible. There are some other interesting technologies out there that try and alleviate it. You know, some of the technologies where it will be for some of the facial recognition stuff. So when you approach your screen or your data stream or whatever it is you pulled up, if it doesn't recognize it's you, the screen won't go on. Same again if somebody's looking over your shoulder. It'll identify that and it'll close the screen down. So there are levels that, again, you can put in, but it's a constant onion that you're peeling, Paul. And, you know, to a focus on that's no bad thing, sir.
Yeah.
It's the strongest I can leave it, like, you know, but yeah, I can't give you the ABC, sir. There isn't one.
The worry is if you try and build a business on that, it's such a difficult topic for people to grapple with. And I think something that was said that was striking to me was this critical thinking. Was it Jake or yeah, this statement of critical thinking, right? So, and I don't know whether I'm being particularly profound in joining dots that might not be related, but this whole thing about critical thinking. So there are people that think about these kind of problems. They're orientated that way, okay? And they may be in the, you know, public sector, academic sector, maybe some higher level sort of professional sectors. But those people are aware of this problem. So again, I think Jake said this concept of creating collaborations or sort of groups of people that are considered to be neutral enough to take on the responsibility for the critical thinking part, right? And when I say joining, you know, these strange dots, I do feel like a bit of a nutter when I say this, but with the pandemic, it's it's pretty serious stuff that the government often, when I've been involved with them, they kind of shirk the responsibility of making judgments on how technology and data and things should be put together. But look at what's happening now. I mean, they are literally trumping business. So they're saying economy will shut down, this business will shut down. So it does prove that there is a degree of authority in society that does default to the government. So if there's a lot of people involved with government and academia that have these critical thinking skills, I'm just seeing that, I mean, I know I don't want to imply some kind of authoritarian view here, but I do feel that things have been serious enough that we have to recognize how serious issues with data are, you know, and then maybe start making some real leaps with this appreciation of how important digital is, some real leaps on the government side in the responsibility they take on for influencing priorities, you know, in this space.
Yeah, I thank you so much for making that point, because I think this is coming back to an issue I've been thinking about lately. By training, I studied marketing, and I worked in marketing and customer experiences teams in the RBS. So I'm very interested in the aspect of customer data and how that is collected and used. And I think this can be connected back to the issue that you raised here, because in my opinion, it comes back to education and it comes back to control. So a number of my students in my marketing courses are raising this question about companies are collecting data on us and using it to, for example, give me personalized ads. And I don't feel comfortable about that. So I think there is this very basic level of knowledge of what kind of data is collected and used, but people don't really know how exactly the process works. So there's this kind of lack of education, for example, around how data is collected, what kind of companies are collecting your data in which ways, how cookies work, etc., etc., and then also giving people the control. And in order to take control, they have to have the education and knowledge first. So everything is kind of connected. And by giving people the control, I think this will also resolve parts of the trust issues. Because if people feel they understand what is going on and they control what is happening to their personal data, then they're starting to trust the process again.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And it's almost like at school, you get taught to cross the road, right? It's almost like at school, you know, we need to very quickly to be educating young people on what data is. We use data among ourselves, and we're really conscious of what it is. And when I look back at my career, I realize I'm in a very small minority of professional people that even understand what data is. In the public space, data might be something they get with their mobile phone that allows them to watch videos, right? And they get so much quantity of data for £10 a month, but they're not really cognizant of what data actually is. And it's not just your name and address, is it? It's every time you've looked at something, every time you've clicked on something, you know, where you were at a particular time, or and very pertinent to now, where your location has been and where you've visited and who you've connected with, right? And this is really, it seems to me that this is just, this is like a pandemic itself, this whole data thing. So, and it's not a technical issue. I think it's, again, I think it was Jake again that said, we don't teach finance to kids after 16. And what we do teach them at school is very limited, right? It's almost like we don't want to teach people, you know, what data really is, because it's so important for society to have kind of free access to it.
Could I ask Morag, you joined us very early on the event and you're still with us, which is fantastic. Do you have any reflections over this?
I found it interesting. I've been a developer worked in the public sector, gone off to do a master's in technology and back again. And I joined this to understand more about data, because I didn't really do much data as part of my master's. I found it interesting because security, I worked for NCR, so security was critical, but it was a lot easier in the past. Now it's down to trust. How do you trust who you're connected to? And the answers aren't out there. And I think it's good that the government's looking at it, because we do need an ID, but it's then the level of trust. Will that be sold on? If I use that for something else, what data are they going to capture? And I read end user agreements, except for the ones that I've got no option other than to click yes. So I found it interesting, and just understanding how your technology can help enable things. Because I used to see an awful lot of pitches, I found it very useful to see, here's what we can do with our product. Now here's the technology underneath. And I enjoy the technology part very much, but I found it helpful to see the solution at the beginning to put everything in context. So it's been food for thought, and the questions are still out there and will be, I think, for a long time.
Mark, it's interesting. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's just I think the genie's out the bottle clearly as far as data, and the challenge for organisations such as Mine's a Housing Association is about what do we mean by informed consent. And at the moment, the commercial drivers, as we all know, have motivated or encouraged people to accept services and not really involved through informed consent, or indeed made informed consent difficult. So I think in terms of people not understanding data, those comments are absolutely right. But the cause of the mistrust, I think, is going to be something that's going to be really quite challenging. So as far as I'm concerned, as an organisation who's wanting to try and use clients' data for their own benefit, that we need to frame that argument very carefully and try and make people understand the motivation behind it. But informed consent at the moment is still something I think it depends on who's offering the service.
Yeah, and it's also an education needed, not just at primary school, but it's needed at primary school for the youngsters that are actually starting to use the phones, but it's needed constantly because things change, and they change fairly quickly. So it's, stopping something at 16, the finance one is, there's age appropriate education, but there's also at 16, by the time the youngsters hit 18 and leave school, that's 2 years. So something else is bound to have popped out of the woodwork, and there's a need for education there, but there's a need for education through life. And it's particularly an issue with people, and there's no age breakdown, but there's elderly people now using tablets, which is a great enabler and an excellent, but they have no idea what they're doing with it. And unless they've got somebody handing over the technology saying, I've locked it down, this is what you can do not do that, do not trust anybody, any emails you get, unless they're from me, it's a big issue. That whole generation doesn't really understand it, and they're at risk because there's nothing simple and idiot-proof that they can do to figure out what it is that they can and can't do and what's safe and not safe.
Yeah, it's very interesting. My father, who's getting on in his early 80s, and he recounted a story a couple of weeks ago where he was watching his sort of granddaughter, who was about 6, getting ready for bed, and she was jumping up and down and taking her clothes off, throwing them around to put her pajamas on. And then she was doing it in front of the telephone on TikTok. And then my dad, who's not that technically competent, but he went absolutely crazy, going, what are you doing? Do you not understand what you're doing? And then of course the granddaughter going, oh, you're old, you don't understand. But you can see that both sides had a viewpoint, but myself as a technical person was just, you know, horrified from both perspectives, right? So, and again, I feel that we're aware of this, and I listen to this stuff all the time on the tech news. This is my business, right? But I just think that people don't want to be bothered with it. The benefit of the technology in their psyche, in their day-to-day, is so great that they just trust that society will look after them. You know, the government or some other entity is making sure that they're okay as long as they're good.
Helen, could we hear from you?
Sounds like we've lost Helen.
Yeah, last few minutes until 1 o'clock. It'd be good to hear as well from the internal WorldScope, Johnny, Francesco. How were your thoughts on the event? And Ellen, at any point, if you come back and you want to join in the conversation, we haven't heard from you yet.
I think this is Francesco here. I'm a full stack developer at WorldScope, been there for 3 years now. My thoughts are, this is very interesting conversation. People that are approaching the internet today are not fully aware of you know, the bad sides of it, as you guys pointed out. And I think it's our job to make that clearer. And that can start from little things. It's, you know, even the way we design things, the way we structure websites for as simple as they can be. So yeah, I'm a true believer of this cause, and yeah, we're fighting it together with WorldScope, making things more accessible. So yeah, totally agree with what you said, guys.
Thanks, Francesco.
Francesco, I've got a point to ask, kind of a technical thing. So you and Antero both encountered the, is it the Shekel shapes thing? And I know initially people think of it as just a way of validating form input, but it's more than that, isn't it? It's all about kind of policing the data shapes that go through systems. And I've always wondered whether, with some thought, that could end up being kind of, you know, like related to rules. So when people do let data go, the terms and conditions can be a lot more automated around these data shapes. Do you think that's a possible or?
I think that's a very interesting point because something I really look into is fact checking. And I think that could really help with that. Fake news is all over the place. People don't know what's real out there because you know, social media really fuel this kind of thing and they make money out of it. So I think what you're saying, yes. So validating the source of information, I really much approve that because yeah, how else could you do that? It's very difficult for fact checkers, fact-checking companies to validate all sorts of news. So I think, you know, the source should have the solution, which is probably close to what you were saying. So add metadata to these info, like where they're coming from, who wrote them, you know, what's the source.
Yeah, so there's like a trust, because every time the word trust is mentioned, I've noticed that slightly less technical people see it as how to trust others with something, right? But I was thinking often, how do you trust the data itself, its provenance? Where did it come from? You know, has it been changed in transit? That kind of thing. But my initial question about the shapes was more about, could we link the data shapes to regulatory terms and conditions that are saying this is the data shape for this kind of data, and then it allows people to resolve in a simple way, oh, this is how much this data is going to be vulnerable or how it's going to be used, rather than at the moment it's sort of a very complicated terms and conditions with some kind of service provider. But if we were able to use these small data shapes around the data context itself, as it's being collected or transported around, whether the data shapes themselves can carry, you know, the consent description.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a possibility. That's something we could work towards. I share the same ideas as you.
Yeah.
I think it's possible. Yeah.
I think that going forward, there definitely has to be a lot more pressure on developers, and not just developers, but people behind companies that handle our data. There will have to be a lot more pressure on them and how they're using their data. And like that's what you mentioned, and restricting the shape of data according to terms and conditions and stuff like that is a step. But I think the wider problem comes from the fact that, well, the internet is a lot different now than what it was when it was created. And when it was created, none of these things were problems, because you had maybe 20 nerds accessing it. And nowadays it's something that is just in our lives. So I think we have to rethink and reshape the internet and how we interact with it.
Do you think developers should have like an ethics certificate or something, you know?
I think developers should at least be aware of these things, and it should be a part of education. Mm-hmm. I had at university, I had a module that talked about that, but a lot of the things that we talked about were basically the legal frameworks that exist and that are in place. And I think it's very obvious in a lot of ways that those frameworks, even the legal frameworks, are outdated, and the legal frameworks are not responding quickly enough to the developments in the technological side. So maybe if education starts focusing a bit more on the ethics of it, but not basing it on a legal framework, rather basing it on what's actually happening and what people are doing with data and how that's affecting people.
If I can add to that, we had this conversation before, and it's very interesting because medic needs to have certifications to, you know, do their job, but a programmer, well, that can be anybody. They don't need that formal degree. So what if someone, you know, a developer, months out of quick degree course, publishes a website regarding medical data? Who controls that? Who's safeguarding the users of that website? So I think some sort of formal certification is needed for these kind of things. Obviously, that's different from a personal blog, but I think there needs to be some formality to this process.
Yeah, and I think I was trying to say, maybe I was joining the dots up too much and getting, you know, with this pandemic going a bit loopy. But I just think there's maybe a need for an acceleration of awareness from a government point of view, and linking up to what Jake's was kind of suggesting, immediately putting together with this acceleration in digital awareness, as it were, putting together a mechanism for critical thinkers to get together to then sit down and say, how do we create these frameworks to push down? Because if you're building property, if you're an architect, if you're building a house or a bridge or whatever, then there are already in society these warrants or licenses or qualifications that are required. But in technology, which is now becoming quite profound, it's profound how, you know, short we are of these things. But maybe this pandemic is a catalyst to say, right, the government needs to take a bit more responsibility instead of being on the back foot with some of this stuff and actually make it happen.
I have to say, because the internet's grown as it has over the last 20, 25 years. What's happening now with the pandemic, even while the pandemic's going, we've got a political collapse across the world. So that you've got more draconian measures in China, India's using the internet as a propaganda machine, so is the United States. Britain's got Brexit, so we're leaving the EU, and we're unraveling all the controls and regulations that were in place through the GDPR model. So I'm a bit worried and concerned that it's actually being unraveled and it's not being thought about properly, or at least in the correct terms.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's what I sort of said. I'm not looking for an authoritarian solution, but there definitely needs to be something, because I just see technology being similar to the pandemic. I mean, a big thing that's come out is the whole mental health thing, right? Massive appreciation of mental health now. So on that basis, that there's like a vacuum. I don't know how it should be filled, but I think it's because Jake had said about these critical thinkers, and there's certain people that can understand this and discuss it, and then there's a large number of people that just don't understand. So, but I do appreciate if you get an exclusive group of people like us into a room, then of course you've got bias and all sorts that would creep in, and some degree of authoritarianism of some sort. But it's definitely a problem we have to fix.
I think that has to start in early education. No, that's because everyone's learning how to use PCs, tablets, or whatever kind of devices they're using at a very early age, and I think that has to be put into an education system very early on. And it's about, well, we literally in the UK we've got a government that doesn't listen to science. I mean, how are you going to solve that problem first before you start educating people about the rights and wrongs and the abuse of data, or the wrong ways of data, when they're actually promoting it themselves? We're in a difficult time at the moment, I think.
I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah,
that's what I was gonna.
Well done, Ian.
That's a good point, Paul. We're running out of time, 5 minutes over. It was really great to have you all during the event and in this conversation. I think it was really, really interesting. Thanks, everyone. We hope to see you all in the next time, and have a good day.